This is my list of 6 films that I think you should watch during the Euros. I would have gone 5, but I found it too difficult to pick 5, so here's 6. First up, strictly speaking, it's not a film, it's actually a television series, and it is Fantasy Football 2004 with Baddiel and Skinner.
Hi, welcome to Euro 2004.
Now, many of you will recognise Baddiel and Skinner from the famous song The Three Lions back in the 90s. Now, they were originally came to fame with the laddish culture of the 90s, something that has changed dramatically over the last couple of decades. Fantasy football was a very popular programme back in the 90s, all about Premier League football. It had a lot of comedy, and then it was dropped. This was the return. I love this. I think it's very funny. It might not be for all of you, but I would recommend taking a look, see if it's something you'd enjoy. It's just got past masters of the game. It's got Baddiel and Skinner. They're just 2 lads sat on a couch talking about football, interviews with players, celebrities, lots of skits. It's just a very, very funny DVD.
Hello and welcome to Fantasy Football Euro 2004.
At number 5, another very obscure one that you are going to struggle to find. Again, do have a look on your favourite auction site. I found this in a pound shop about 15 years ago. It's this, the TalkSport Road Trip. This was filmed in 2006. The backdrop was the Germany World Cup. It's a great look about the experience of the tournament. I love this. I love watching this before a tournament, before the Euros or before the World Cup, just to get me in the mood. It reminds me of a time that wasn't so great for England on the pitch, but was fantastic off of it. The fan experience during that World Cup was incredible. The TalkSport team did a very, very good job of piecing together the behind-the-scenes action from a fan's perspective and, of course, from their own perspective of being on tour on the tournament. I remember speaking to Moose actually a couple of years ago about this, and I think he was quite chuffed that I found this in a pound shop.
Officers described being trapped in their car as the mob closed in.
England. What the hell had happened to England?
Rival fans taunted each other, fighting broke out.
The one thing that summed us all up was our football.
Okay, now we're getting down to the business end, and we're only at 4, but this particular film could have easily ended up at number 1. I found it very tricky. Some of you might not find this a popular choice at number 4, and some of you will think that this should have been a lot higher. One Night in Turin, not to be confused with other titles of similar names, if you catch my drift. It's One Night in Turin. Of course, this is the documentary film that was put together. It's an absolute masterpiece, all about the World Cup of 1990 and England's journey on the pitch, off of it again, all of the trials and tribulations for the boys, fans, and of course, the difference, the culture, the change in football and how people viewed it at this point. It really changed the culture in this country. It changed how we viewed football. We had the hooliganism of the 80s and some difficulties. In fact, it came a point, as this film does discuss, where there were talks about even banning England from the World Cup of 1990 to avoid fan trouble in Italy. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and this goes through the archives and brings you footage perhaps you've never seen before from different angles. It's cleverly put together. It has brilliant songs of the era all across the bottom, the likes of New Order and The Farm, and it's also narrated by Gary Oldman. This is brilliant. Gaz is on the front with his tears, of course. If you want to get prepared, if you want to feel some goosebumps before a game, then I definitely recommend watching this. This will take you back. It takes me back, and I wasn't old enough to remember the 1990 World Cup because I was only 3. And yeah, it's well worth taking a look at to give you the history, some clarity about England, its team, its history, and how it was for the nation at that tournament and why it changed the 90s in football, in culture, and up to this day. Take a look. That's my number 4.
You think it's big and clever, do you, swearing and shouting at people? Can't you think it's something constructive to say? Because if you can, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah, all right. Why don't you play 2 people up front instead of 1?
A controversial choice at number 3, I grant you, but well, it's a feel-good film and that's why it's there. I find it very funny. Ricky Tomlinson stars in Mike Bassett, England manager. I think it's great. Now, this particular mockumentary, it's a comedic performance It's very, very good. And it's essentially a portrayal of former England manager Graham Taylor. There was a similar documentary, a real-life documentary, that went behind the scenes of Graham Taylor's tenure with the England side as manager. That's his failure to get England out of the group stage of Euro 92 and then further failing to get England to the World Cup of 94 in the USA. This is very similar, this mockumentary of that impossible job documentary in the 90s that did tour with Graham Taylor. The difference with this, I suppose, is that, well, Mike Bassett, he kind of sort of gets there in the end, and this is without giving anything away. He just kind of makes it, but he fails at every single turn.
Santiago Muñoz, if you get yourself to England, Newcastle United will give you a trial. That's a big club.
At number 2, I have a trilogy. Yes, I have 3 films. Cheating, I know, but I don't care because it's my list. And I couldn't decide between the 3 of them. They all offer something different. It is the Goal trilogy. So we've got Goal 1, Goal 2, and of course, Goal 3. The first 2 films, Goal 1 and Goal 2, had a significantly different budget and a much higher budget compared to Goal 3. Goal 1 sees a young Santiago Muñoz, a Mexican who loves football, very, very talented, loved it all his life, but essentially he is working as a gardener with his dad's business. One day a scout finds him and sees his talent and wants to bring him to England for a trial. This story is a very traditional Roy of the Rovers type epic. Much of this is set in Newcastle and on the backdrop of the Magpies, of course one of the greatest footballing cities in the world. Santiago Muñoz goes to Newcastle to try to achieve his dream as a professional footballer. Well worth watching for any of you fans out there who think, you know, you might have a chance at playing one day for a professional footballing club, whether young or old. This shows that you can do it. Well, I mean, you've got to have some skill, but... Goal 2 is the next journey for a professional footballer. Santiago gets picked to play for Real Madrid, living the dream it's entitled, and we up the big names, as you can see just here. One David Beckham is in this piece. This talks about the rise and the fall. This shows what it's like being a professional footballer, but reminds you that at the end of the day, he's just a human being and goes through issues like we all do. At the same time, goes through issues that perhaps only a professional footballer would know about, and that sometimes we miss what it's like to be at the highest stage and to fall to some of your graces. And Goal 3. Now sadly this had a significantly reduced budget. That being said, I still enjoyed this very, very much. Taking a look at the backdrop of the England 2006 campaign. It does use green screen and footage taken at that World Cup for this, which is very noticeable. But that being said, the storyline behind it I quite like. Now this person here is actually the star of the film, not Santiago Muñoz, which a lot of people were confused about when this came out, particularly because he's front and centre on the cover, isn't he? But no, it actually stars JJ Feld, who was actually in Captain America. He portrays a very good performance of an England player on his last legs, essentially. Somewhat far-fetched, perhaps. I enjoy it because I'm an England fan, and well, it's largely about England and playing for England, so it's well worth looking at. Now, it doesn't have Alessandro Nivolo, who of course plays Santiago's friend in the first 2 films, and very, very good player for Newcastle and Real Madrid. And a lot of people were very disappointed in this. In fact, essentially JJ Feld pretty much takes over that role in this film, and a lot of people said that that's where this should have taken place, and I think it was mainly due to the budget. Nonetheless, I like watching this film.
If you could have been a footballer, you'd have been snapped up by England schoolboys 2 years ago.
You cheeky little git. I don't need to go down no careers office to know how you'll end up.
Now, of course, you're all wondering what my number 1 film is. When Saturday Comes, I love this film. This follows the journey of Jimmy Muir. There weren't many options for this young man, and many people that were in his position in a working class town and city up north. There was either working in a factory or working down the mines. Jimmy Muir, well, he was a great footballer, but he was told he wasn't good enough to play professionally, so he went on to have a career in a factory instead, until one day he gets picked out by the manager of a local team, and then his journey into professional footballing begins, but not without trials and tribulations along the way. This film contains everything. Love story, a real rags to riches epic, and also learning what it's like to become a man, learning morals, making tough decisions along the way. And by the way, this is a VHS tape, just in case any of you, if you don't know what a VHS tape is, I'll show you. Where's this? That's a VHS tape. It's magnetized oxide. It also has Emily Lloyd. Many people will be familiar of some of Emily Lloyd's work over the years, and Pete Postlethwaite. Wow, I said that okay, even with a cold. My favourite, #1 go-to film, and probably my go-to film of all time. Underestimated, under-awarded. Go look at it, it's great. To Jimmy, life was just a game until the game became his life. Do you know what? Sounds a lot like me.